Welcome to Electric Evolution with Liz Allan. This podcast explores the transition to net zero and the systems driving real change in how we move, live and power our world. Every week I sit down with the people leading that change, those offering insight, innovation and impact in many ways people don't fully see until they hear their stories. If you're ready for real conversations that inspire action and drive change, please like this video, subscribe to the channel and join us on this journey. And let's cut through the noise and build a better future together. On my episode today, I've got a chap who's got he's got the same surname as me, Simon Allan. Simon Allan. Yep. But we're not related. No. I just thought I'd say that as we start.
Probably best to get that covered straight away.
So just to explain, okay, so Simon is a sales development consultant for BMW Group. Now, I met Simon when I was with Amy Carter, probably about 6-8 weeks ago now. And Simon was then working for Martin's Group, which is Renault, over in, well, they kind of, Renault's part of it. So Martin's Group over in the other side of Reading. And we took a Renault 5 electric out for a test drive. And I've got to say, I was so impressed with you, Simon. That's why I kind of said, you've got to come on the podcast today. And here you are. He's changed jobs in between. Come on.
Oh, geez. I know. What can I do?
So rude. But after 21 years of working in automotive, and then you're now doing something, you're still kind of involved in automotive, aren't you?
Yes, but yeah. This was a great opportunity for me to, I guess, sort of branch out and expand my knowledge, my wings, if you want to call it that, but stay within an industry that I love and have loved for a long time, for 21 years, and having worked for different manufacturers and franchises, this has given me a really good opportunity to do something slightly different.
And it was just so lovely kind of talking to you and Dan, kind of, who was your colleague at Martin's, that, yeah, it was just trying to get you on was really important for me. But sorry that I had an operation in between and it didn't quite work out in the time scale.
Don't worry, I'll be waiting around. It's fine. Don't worry about it.
So, right, let's start. You've just said you've kind of been in the sector for such a long time. Why? Tell me why. What was it? What was it that brought you there?
Well, I think obviously I'm a petrol head first and foremost. I think that's the first thing to sort of mention. I'd been in sales for about 10 years before that, in recruitment and mobile phones. And to be honest, I fell into the motor trade pretty much by accident, and I think most people do. I don't think there's a huge amount of us that are out there that sort of leave school and think we want to be a car salesman or a sales executive. So you do fall into it. My first job was with Dover Court, which is now Lookers, in Battersea in London, as a used car sales exec, which was brilliant. It was a great job, fantastic, loved it. Distance was a killer. Unfortunately, that's why it didn't last after 18 months. And I spent, believe it or not, majority of my time has actually been spent with sort of Japanese brands. So I was with Honda for a long time, Suzuki as well. But a lot of the franchises that I worked for were very sort of small family-run dealerships, which I loved, and actually didn't get into a main kind of PLC business until probably 2018, 2019. And then I got to work for Mini and BMW, or Mini, and I loved it. It was the brand. My number one wish was to work and sell Minis. And I think, anybody in the motor trade, they tend to find one particular brand that they love, so that's the one that they sort of go for. Absolutely loved it. And obviously, as you know, finished my tenure with Renault. Which is,
yeah. I don't know whether you got a long service award, but you probably deserved one. And actually, for those of you watching, sorry if you're listening to this, but behind him, I've got to point out that he's got Lego vehicles behind him. You've got the vehicle off Ghostbusters. I can't remember. Is there a name for that?
Ecto-1.
That's it. So you've got Ecto One, you've got loads of cars. They're all. I just thought they were normal cars, but it's all Lego, and it just looks
Lego.
brilliant. So if you get a
Yeah.
chance to watch this on YouTube, then please have a look at his background, because it's so impressive. Thank you for sharing it as well.
This
But
is my office, so this is what's on display.
exactly, I was going to say. So I have never had anybody on this podcast that's worked for a dealership before.
Okay.
Or I know you kind of, or has been working with dealerships before. And people who've been watching and listening to the podcast, and they maybe followed what I talk about on LinkedIn and places like that, they've probably picked up on a number of situations, not when me and Amy went for the test drive in the Renault 5, but prior to that, where kind of dealerships weren't quite, how can I say it? The customer experience wasn't quite up to the kind of where I would have expected it to be. So it would be really good because, like I say, Amy and I had a brilliant experience with that Renault 5 electric. We both drive EVs, so it wasn't difficult for you and Dan to kind of go get in that car and go, because you know what you're doing. But there were a lot of people that, because we're just going to concentrate on electric, talking about it for
Yeah.
now. But, when you were at Martin's or any of the other places that you've been working where they've been selling EVs, what is it about the experience when you're test driving an EV that needs to be different, to kind of just jumping in I'm not saying for somebody like me and Amy, but I mean somebody who's never driven an EV, because really there's, like I say, I've got to say, some of the others have just been a bit shoddy. The experiences have just been a bit shoddy, but what makes a better experience in your mind?
I think what you need to take into consideration is exactly what you said. It's the fact that the customer maybe have never driven an EV before. They've never looked at an EV. They've never thought of an EV. We do live in a world now where a lot of people will do their research and everything else on the internet. We know that. And as sales execs, a lot of us will know that our job has changed slightly from that respect. But there's still the old school, way of selling a vehicle and getting the people in. Bearing in mind that just with an EV as well is that you're not only sort of you're talking to people about new technologies, but you could also be talking about something as simple as going from a manual to an automatic car.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I always sort of used to joke and say that part of my job is almost like a driving instructor now, because you are sort of trying to quell any fears that people might have about jumping into an automatic, and then of course you've got the added bonus of then teaching them about the EV and the drive of that as well. And that's not just people maybe of a certain age or anything like that. This is from 18 to 80, male and female, whoever it might be, because they will have sort of driven one particular car or one particular way for a very long time. So I think there certainly needs to be empathy, definitely, with the customer. I think that's what some salespeople unfortunately don't tend to have. We work in a business that is very close to my heart, and I love, and I know a lot of people who feel the same way as well. They love it as well, and you do have to sort of sometimes take a step back and just listen to the customer, listen to any sort of fears. I don't know if that's really the right word, but any apprehensions that they might have. And actually maybe just slow the process down a little bit more than you would do normally, just to sort of go through and sort of have sort of bookmarks across the conversation to make sure that the customer understands. Because the customer will sit and talk to you, but actually in the back of their mind, they might be worrying about the test drive, which tends to be the biggest one. I've learned over time that people's perception is actually not that they're afraid of, let's say, an automatic, for example. They're not afraid of an automatic car. What they're afraid of is stalling. What they're afraid of is not having control over the car that they've had with a manual for many years. With an EV, those worries, that being one of them, of course, but there are other worries involved. Charging, we all know, the fabled range anxiety. Some people do still ask some funny questions about can they charge it in different weather conditions? There's this still happens, and bearing in mind that EVs have been around now for a while, we still have all of those questions that we need to answer from a customer's perspective. So, it really is listening. It's the age-old, sales pitch. It's you've got to listen, repeat back, get them to understand, and always go out with them on the test drive. Certainly on an EV, because they might, touch wood, I never had an issue with a customer on a test drive, but you will get it. Yeah. And also as well, don't forget is that we're now in an industry where there is so much choice from an EV point of view. We're not going back to sort of 2015 where there was one or two. We are talking a mass market of electric cars. And again, like you would do with the petrol, yours has got to be explained to be better than your competitors down the road. And
actually, if you've never driven an EV, you don't know what you don't know. That is my favourite phrase. You don't know what you don't know. But because I started this podcast back in 2022, and I wanted to understand it, but about driving EVs and about charging and lots of other things about renewables and decarbonisation, etc. But when it came down to it, you can read up or you can watch YouTube videos or whatever you fancy doing, but it isn't until you sit in that driving seat and actually drive an EV with somebody there, and like you said about actually having somebody in there with you. If you've never driven one, or if your customer's never driven one, please don't put them in an EV when you've not explained it, because it really is one of those things that they have to experience. You've got to be there, haven't you?
I think you've got to take it almost back to basics, and this is why I said earlier about sort of joking about being a driving instructor. I'll give you two cars as an example, two electric cars that I've sold in abundance: the Mini, the new shape Mini that was released last year, and the Renault 5. Okay, so let's take those two cars as an example. When you jump in the Mini, there is no gear stick. Okay, there is no handbrake, old school. You jump in the Renault 5, there is no old school handbrake, there is no old school gear stick. Okay, the Mini is a button on the display in front of you with a button for the parking brake, and the Renault 5 has an American style gear stick on the steering wheel, and the handbrake is sort of up in the bottom of the dashboard. So little things like we, salespeople get to learn and understand very, very quickly. The customer sort of all of a sudden is jumping into something very foreign to them. And you do, as I said, you've got to have that empathy. You've got to think, how would I feel if I was jumping into this car for the first time? How am I going to react? Yes, I appreciate you're going to get some people jump in and sort of be very blasé. Yeah, that's fine. Don't worry, I understand. Okay, but we're going to go for a drive now. So it's not just about understanding it. This is about actually driving the vehicle on the road. So, all of those little things, the charging, we've got to be able to talk the customer through the charging. We've got to make sure that we're not throwing so much jargon at them that they have no understanding of what we're saying. Yeah. So, we're almost, with all due respect, we're almost sort of harking back to the old age of explaining cars to people who, have driven, a very box standard Mark 1 Ford Fiesta, and they're suddenly driving, something with all the gizmos and gadgets of the day. You are having to sort of hark back to that life. But you've got to have I think, with car sales, is you have to have a real love for it. Not to sort of go off tangent, but people in this industry, in my industry, know the hours that we work, the difficulties that we come across every day. You've got to have a genuine love for it. And selling cars to people, whether it's an 18-year-old who's buying their first car, Ford Fiesta or whatever it might be, to somebody buying a family car or a second car or their 20th Renault, you've got to love everything that you do. And by me moving jobs, it's not that I don't love what I do. I absolutely do. But this is just something different for me to experience. So, and it's again like somebody going in for an electric car, right?
Absolutely. And you're right. I mean, I've got to say, when I first drove an EV, I'd never driven an automatic. I always loved my gear shift. I was a gears person, but now Do you know what? It just doesn't bother me at all. I love the experience of driving an electric
Yeah.
vehicle. I really, really do. But it's kind of, I was saying to you before we started recording, there is misinformation out there, and people have got their own agendas, their personal agendas when they come in to see somebody like yourself. And I was saying, my nephew had a loan vehicle when his car was in for repair, and they gave him an iPace, and they didn't explain to him about the how to use regen, and he loved the experience of acceleration, because that's great, but they didn't tell him about, when you take your foot off that accelerator, this is what's going to happen, and you make sure that you don't have your nose on the windscreen or your dashboard, because it's that, isn't it? It's that bit, it's the regen that's really different. It's not just the going from a manual to an automatic, it's the regenerative braking.
That's the other thing as well. So once you've done the first bits at the dealership in terms of the gearbox and handbrakes and features and functions and everything else, you're absolutely right. The next thing when you go out on the drive is, well, number one, when you start the car, there is no noise. Customers go, this is weird. There
Yeah.
is no noise. Okay. You've got to point out that on the dashboard there will be something that will say that the car is ready to go.
Yeah.
Okay. The regen, for me, is one of the best things I've ever experienced in an electric car. I love it. I absolutely love it. Even in a hybrid as well. And thirdly, you're absolutely right, the acceleration. So when I used to talk to customers, I used to use an example, which is, and every salesperson will have their own example. I used to say it's like a torch. So if you've got a torch and you switch it on, like a petrol engine, it doesn't gradually get brighter and brighter and brighter and brighter the more you hold the button or whatever it might happen. When you switch on a torch, it's 100% straight away. So that is the same as the battery that is sitting in that car. As soon as you put your foot on the accelerator, you've got 100% of the power, okay? And it will just build up speed, okay? So that's all it does. With the regen, again, different salespeople have different things, but I will sort of sit there at the desk with my feet pretending I'm on a pedal, and I will explain, what to do, and again explain that in details, but do it in a way that the customer will understand. I'm not saying that the customer is an idiot. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that you have your own jargons, your own way of explaining it. You've now got to portray this across to the customer, and I think some customers I've spoken to who have been to other dealerships have come away and gone, I've got no idea what they said. I've got no idea. What's this regen? What's this battery braking? What's this 1 foot driving and things like that? And you might not think it, but the customer wants you to explain this stuff to them. I appreciate we live in a world nowadays where everybody wants things quickly. They just want to go in and buy a car. Okay, we know that. And buying a car now takes so much longer than it did when I started. Paperwork, FCA regulations and all the bits and pieces that go with that. But actually it's now about the cars as well. When you jump in a car, you're not just saying, well, that's how you tune the radio and that's how you adjust the mirrors. You are doing everything. That screen's got multiple this. You can do this. You can do your Apple CarPlay, Android Auto, da 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 da. That process is huge. Even a handover now isn't a half an hour job. It is probably an hour to an hour and a bit. So
It's all got to be incorporated, but a lot of dealerships just don't do that. There was one dealership that I took out a I'm not going to say because I'm going to give away which dealership it is, and Reading. So anyway, but basically the salesperson, I said, is there auto hold? She didn't even know where auto hold was. So it was just, and it was really kind of like the conversation kind of went like, just chatting away, and she's basically saying, oh well, my preference is for diesel or petrol. Do you know what I mean? And I was just like, oh my god, I'm in an EV and you're still trying to tell me that you would prefer me to buy a petrol or a diesel. It just, it just beggared belief, to be honest. I've got to say
Scary,
it.
isn't it? Yeah, it's scary. And again, this goes back to the very beginning. And we're talking about EVs, but it's a generalization. You've got to take it back to the sales process. You've got to ask questions. You've got to speak to people. And again, it's even more emphasized when you're talking to a customer about EVs. You want to find out what that car's being used for every day, what that car's been used for, in a week, who's going to be using it, things like that. And I think people forget the important, simple questions of, do you have off-street parking?
Oh God, yeah.
No,
Yeah.
I don't. Okay, so how are you going to be looking to charge this? Oh, well, we've got a rapid charger centre next door, or we've got X, Y, and Z down the road. I sold a car to a lovely couple, because obviously at Renault we do Dacia as well. So it's a little Dacia Spring, great little cars, and they don't have any charging at home. They live in a flat, but they work for a large Swedish flat pack company, and they get free charging.
Yes.
And all they use the car for is a bit of shopping and to go backwards and forwards to work. Hallelujah, helps the day. So if you've got that, and I think dealers need to have they need to have the chargers installed. They need to have the ability to make sure that a car is ready. It's no. Our dealership was right next door to a petrol station, so if there was a car that unfortunately didn't have any fuel for whatever reason, it's a 5-minute job next door, you fill it up. That's not the same with charging. So again, the dealerships have got to take some responsibility to make sure that the cars are charged and ready for the next day. You don't know who's going to come in, or with appointments and stuff like that. So there's you've got to really take it back to the very basics and really emphasize those questions and really get a great understanding of who's sat in front of you and what they're going to be using that car for. Well, we're going to use it as a main car, and we probably do about 400 miles, 400 to 500 miles a week. Okay. Is that car going to be right for them? If it only does 200 miles on a full charge, you've got to ask these questions. You've got to use your knowledge to be able to educate the customer at the same time.
Yeah, and even things like you're saying about the charging, nobody seems to ask about or nobody has seemed to ask about whether people have got off-street parking. I was talking to an Uber driver probably about 3-4 months ago now, and we were both having a bit of a problem with an ultra-rapid charger up in kind of West London, and he'd basically said to me, he lived in a flat, and he drives up to Birmingham a lot and kind of down to Kent and all over the place, depends on where he's called to. And it was costing him a lot of money because nobody had bothered to ask him, what kind of charging he had locally, and that's difficult, and that because we know that ultra rapid is expensive, and that kind of, he said if he'd have known, he might have had a different outcome, made a different choice, which for somebody like that, until charging prices, public charging comes down, or whenever it does, or whatever happens to it to make it more kind of accessible, that is off-putting for people, isn't it?
Yeah, and if let's talk about people's perceptions. They think they've got the right information, or X, Y, Z. We hear a lot of things about electric cars in the news, which tends to find that 99% of it is rubbish. And one of the things is about the cost of charging. So EV cars are more expensive than maybe their petrol equivalent. Okay, we know that, and obviously it doesn't help with the with the increased tax over £40,000. That doesn't help with a lot of people. So that's one cost problem that you're going to have. And also, the cost of actually charging at home. So we were talking again before, we were talking about different electric companies and different providers and everything else. And again, it's about educating people. So if you're going to charge it at home, this is going to give you a rough idea of what it's going to cost you. Okay, you can use that as a sort of bookmark towards what you're going to pay in petrol. Okay, so you're going to balance it out, that way. Look at the sort of the car park charges, the sort of the 22 kilowatt charges, and then look at your rapid charges as well. And again, explain to them about the rapid charge. Say, look, this is great because on this car, if you're at 15% and you chuck it onto a rapid charger, it's going to 80% fill your car, and it'll do it in let's say 29 minutes, but it's going to cost you this. Yeah. Now, I don't want to wait around for half an hour. Okay, well, when you stop your car at a service station, you'll go and use the facilities, or you'll go and have a drink, or you'll stop and have something to eat. And guess what? That's probably going to be about 20-25 minutes. So for you then to wait another 4 minutes and actually have your car, charged up to 80%, is a great insight into, and again, an inroad into sort of giving them the information that they want. I was very lucky with the BMW group that I did when I was at Mini. I did the electrification course with the group, which gives you an even better insight into the sort of charge and how to work out how much it's going to cost you depending on size of your battery and the kilowatt charging and everything else. But all this information is on websites. So for a salesperson, if they're not 100% sure, there are tons of websites out there, including you should be with your manufacturers as well. All that information, you can sit down with the customer. The customer knows that you're not going to know every single answer to every single question. So use the initiative to have it there for you, so you can then jump on and use it that way. And try, because again, don't forget that a lot of what we do as salespeople now, when we're speaking to people, certainly with EVs, is we are firefighting. We're firefighting their questions. Yeah, but what about this? Well, it doesn't do this. And they're just going to throw loads of sort of questions and comments at you, and you've then got to basically answer those. Not retaliate, because I think that's an easy thing to do, but you've got to sort of quell any issues or worries that they might have. I think that's what it boils down to.
It's like you said about people coming in with their own personal opinions, isn't it? You don't know what their preconceived ideas are. That Dave down the pub has told me about this. Is this true? So this is I suppose it's about conversation pieces. It's kind of part of your firefighting is actually being ready for those conversation pieces. But because of the way we're moving and because of the ZEV targets and everything like that, there's got to be that kind of level of promotion and understanding, and but I suppose if you've got somebody who's kind of, you said right at the beginning that you're a petrol head, right? Which I get it, totally do, but you also like EVs as well. If you've got people who are just petrol heads and they really don't want to change, then that's a bit of a different conversation. Maybe their wife or husband, whoever it is, because it doesn't have to just be a bloke who's a petrol head, does it?
No.
They've had a conversation. They don't really want to be there. They don't want to hear about an EV, but so they're chucking questions at you. It can't be easy.
I think it's not easy, but then I think, a lot of people at the moment who maybe don't understand necessarily, again, the EVs, and they have their friends, as you said, Dave down the pub, who has his 5 cents to tell you, who unfortunately might not know anything about the EV market and EV cars and has his own agendas, as you quite rightly said. A lot of what they're doing, customers, is they're trying to compare the electric side with what they know as an ICE vehicle. Is it going to be beneficial? When you look at, I mentioned Renault as an example. When you've got the Scenic, which was car of the year, Autocar car of the year last year. You've got the Renault 5 car of the year this year, and I'm not and I'm just using Renault as an example. You've got the Megane as well, which is kind of an unsung hero, really. It's an absolutely phenomenal car. Renault have really done so well with these cars, and even lowered pricing on the mid-spec one to keep it under the £40,000 mark. So these companies are doing a lot to sort of entice people and get people involved, into the EV markets. And everyone we've had, when they released the new Minis, my goodness me, people were falling over themselves. The Aceman's out now as well, which is a fantastic piece of kit. The Countryman is just a phenomenal piece of kit. I was very lucky to have one as a demonstrator. But all the other manufacturers as well. I don't think there's really a bad EV on the market, if I'm being brutally honest. I think every manufacturer should be proud of what they've got lined up. Even the lovely little Spring, which starts life at £15,000, is a great little car if somebody just wants something cheap but electric. It's there's a market out there for everybody. We've just got to reel in our acronyms and our sort of featured dumps. That's where the customers are struggling with. People will come in and say what they want. Has it got Apple CarPlay? Yes, it has. Okay, but what are you going to use the car for? Not just run with that, but what are you going to use the car for? What's it going to be used for during the week? Who's going to drive it? How many people? Do you put a lot of weight into the boot with bags and suitcases and everything else? Even to the point of, are you heavy-footed? I am fortunately am a heavy-footed driver. So when I was in an EV, I would get a lot less than what was being quoted. That's because that's how I'm driving it. With a petrol car, do I worry about that? Not so much, because there's a petrol station every corner. But from an EV point of view, so even ask those questions, do it a little bit tongue-in-cheek at times. See what people's gauge is. Everyone, I'm sure, will say no, they drive sensibly. We know that's not always the case. So it's really is, without sort of sounding like a broken record, it's really about going back to those basics and asking a few more questions than you normally would.
I think you're right. It is, but I can imagine some people kind of going, I'm not going to do that because I'm just going to sound like I'm patronising them. But you're not. You're just giving them information that they haven't got. And I was gonna go back a step, because I know I sort of said this. We talked about this before we started recording, and you've just kind of said, like Mini and Renault, and a lot of there's no EVs that are crappy, So what I don't understand is, so we've had the changes to the ZEV mandate earlier on this year, kind of, and literally, we know that part of the flexibilities that have been introduced, and I talked to Colin Walker about this a few weeks back, the flexibilities were brought in because of lobbying from some of the manufacturers. I just wonder, and this is my cynical view, and I said this to you, I just wonder that whether those flexibilities were needed, or whether it was a false sense of security for those that aren't kind of introducing very many models. And so that, because if you think about it, if you've got lobbying that comes through to government to kind of change something like that, and I'm not sure whether you can answer this, Simon, let's just see, but my thinking is, and I said this to Colin, is the ZEV mandate going to make any difference? Because like companies like Mini and companies like Renault, they're just pushing forwards, aren't they? And if you've got some of them that are kind of like lagging behind, like the tortoise and the hare, they're the tortoise, they might have been the ones lobbying, but I just wonder whether like Mini and kind of, or BMW, and Renault, for example, are just rubbing their hands going, you stay there, mate, we know we're going to be ahead.
I think the biggest problem, and we've seen it happen over the last couple of years, is the Chinese market. Is massive now in the UK. So I think, and I can't speak for any manufacturer because I don't know what goes on obviously behind closed doors. But I would say that from my own opinion, I think there was an element of that. I think some of them were just kind of sort of plodding along going, we'll release one or two here. And then people like BYD, and JQ and people like that, and Moda, have really come out all guns blazing. And I've not personally driven any of them. I've seen them. I've sat in them. They're lovely cars. I think the BYD follows a certain trend in terms of its design, which is great because that's going to be the kind of norm. But taken onto consideration, I think and again, I'll use Renault as an example because that's my most recent manufacturer that I work for. They've done so well in the kind of the retro releases. So the Renault 5 for me, I think, was probably one of the biggest releases of the last 10 years in terms of a manufacturer releasing a car from the archives. The interest in it was incredible. The phone calls, the emails, people coming in, have you got one? Have you got one? Have you got one? I know there's rumours that Citroen are going to do a 2CV, which if the renders are anything to be believed, looks fantastic. And obviously Ford with Capri and so on and so forth. So I think there was an element of what you said. I think they're just sort of sitting there going, yeah, okay, you're being lagged behind. We'll catch up eventually. But it's the Chinese guys that have done the tortoise. And that's what's ruffled, should we say, quite a lot of feathers. I think the mandate, I'm going to sit on the fence, probably is the best way to answer that question.
Fence sitting's mine too.
There's a lot of movement. Do I believe everything? No, of course not. We're not designed to believe everything. But I think, from what's to believe, it will be a good thing in the end. I just don't. I think that the road's still very rocky at the moment, and I don't see it going very smoothly. But the 2030 and the 2035 dates and things like that. I don't know. I mean, let's see what happens.
Watch this space, really, isn't it?
It really is. As I said, I've had, believe it or not, many conversations, as you can imagine, with customers who again have their own beliefs and their own thoughts and everything else. And I've been educated. We've sat in the showroom and talked about the exact same thing. So I've been educated, and hopefully I've educated some other people as well on it. We'll see. It's, as I said, rocky road. Depends what our friends in Westminster do. But yeah, we'll see.
It is really, really interesting to kind of because I think personally, just from an outsider's, not kind of an outsider's point of view, really, but looking at Renault, for example, they're doing all the right things.
Absolutely.
So why would they? And this is the other thing, isn't it? Why would anybody take their foot off the accelerator if they're doing a really good job pushing forwards? So
I think it surprised a lot of people. Renault, and hopefully some of them will watch the video and they'll understand what I mean. They have really surprised a lot of people. The cars that they've released, the cars that are going to be released, the Renault 4. The Twingo is going to come back. But think about this logically. A lot of these cars are small cars. Okay, we've had the big fill of all the big SUVs and things like that. But how clever to release, certainly those three cars alone into a market where suddenly people are going, oh, actually, we don't need such big cars. We could run with a smaller car. And the technology again that's gone into them, and you remember on the Renault 5 with the battery indicator on the bonnet. I mean, it's. I know it's something a bit quirky, but you walk up to your car and you go, oh, or you walk away from, oh, that's how much battery. I know,
and it winks at you as well. I love the fact that it winks at you.
Yeah, which the Mini used to do as well. The Mini does as well, funny enough. But Renault have been incredible, second largest growing manufacturer. In recent times. So that's not by luck. That's by incredible
hard work.
hard work and yeah, an initiative as well.
And do you know what I think's really clever with Renault as well is that because they're bringing back retro models. Actually, I'm going to ask you this question from when you were there. Did you find people who were petrol heads and loved the original Renault 5 were kind of going, hang on a minute, I'd not thought of an EV before, but I really had I loved my Renault 5 from however many years ago it was.
This is the beauty of the Renault 5. And to answer your question in a roundabout way, this is the beauty of the Renault 5. Because what they've done is they've designed a car that looks like a Renault 5. Okay, now that might sound like a really silly statement, but think about it. When you look at some of the other EV cars that they've released with a name, and they've gone, doesn't look anything like the original. Okay, not mentioning any names, but
I was going to do, but
that's why I was going to mention their names, but
I was.
I don't want to be done for slander.
No.
But you say to people, and I used to get people stand in front of me and go, "Joe, if you took those badges away, what does it look like? It looks like a Renault 5. Exactly right. So it's playing on the people that are old enough to have owned a Renault 5. Okay. Yeah. There is the quirkiness inside and the little Easter eggs around the car that homage back to the Renault 5 and the turbo. Yeah. And it also has picked up a new following of some, of people that maybe are not old enough to remember the Renault 5, but want something small, sporty, and EV. So it's a double header, which is absolutely fantastic. Yes, I think we to answer your question, yes, we do have people. We've had a lot of people. You'll also know that obviously Renault have got the 3 Turbo, which they're releasing, which is coming out in 2 years' time. If you've got enough money in the bank to own one, they're starting at 127.
Oh my good God! Oh my God!
Yeah, and I think spec'd up it's about 153. Apologies, Renault, if I get the pricing wrong, but I think it's somewhere around that price. That's going to be for the real hardcore people, and they look incredible. They are phenomenal. But of course, don't forget you've got the Alpines as well. So if you can't afford them, but you want something a bit more sporty than the Renault 5, you've got the Alpine, which is practically the same vehicle. So they've been incredibly clever to actually appeal to different levels of people.
I think it's just, it's really quirky. Like I say, that was why I wanted to kind of get you on here, because I just thought the drive itself, both Amy and I both loved it. And if anybody's wanted to look at me, Amy and I did a video each, and we put some stuff on social media, and I know it's on your page as well, isn't it?
Yeah.
But no, it's interesting to think about these people who are now interested. But let's talk about something we discussed before we started recording, which is buttons versus voice control. What are people actually, because who are EVs currently aimed at? Now I think the whole the idea of bringing in smaller EVs is brilliant, because we're a family, there's 3 of us, my son's at uni a lot of the time, there's me and my husband, I'm the one who drives mostly. We don't need a big car, and a lot of I know there are some people who like their great big SUVs and stuff, but not everybody does. But what I do like is I like a bit of old with the new, so I like buttons, but I like the idea of voice control as well.
And I think it's going to be an argument that will rage on for a long time. If I'm honest, I think I'm on the old school side. I love buttons. I love dials. Again, different EVs are going to be different things, and I'm not going to sit here and say one versus the other. But again, let's use the Renault 5 or the Megane or the Scenic or whatever as an example. Have been very, very clever, because you get a touchscreen and you get buttons. So you got the best of both worlds. Yeah. So it's a really good sort of in between idea of functionality for a customer, that if they do eventually move to something which is going to be not no buttons on it, at least you've had some experience. My wife, bless her, I'm sure she won't mind. She probably won't watch this, but I'll mention her anyway. She's not a technical person like me. So, you know, when we looked at different cars for her, and one of the cars we looked at in particular didn't have any buttons, she was like, well, what do I do? And I said, well, you've got, you're doing it. Oh, well, I can't do that while I'm driving. Okay, but that's fine. We'll look at something else. And she ended up with a Renault Rafale, which she absolutely loves. So it's going to be an argument. Now, you asked the question, who are these aimed at? Well, they're aimed at everybody, but there is going to be a lot of people who don't want to use their voice, or they don't want to try and touch a touchscreen while they're driving down the motorway or something like that. Because anybody that sits there and says, well, I wouldn't do that anyway, is lying, because they would. Or they'd pull over, wouldn't they? But they'd be lying. Oh, I never do that. Well, it's like people saying they never go over 70. So, you've got to play it right, yeah? The voice controls are more susceptible potentially to going wrong, but they are easier. So there's always going to be a rough with the smooth, yeah? Buttons can break, things like that, but that is the more simplistic side of it. So, look, I think, as I said, it's going to be an argument that's going to rage on for forever and a time until there is literally an iRobot or a film that's based in the future where you literally just jump in, you sit there and you can just chat to it like it's your mate sort of next to you. And again, don't forget, this is where, things like the chat GTP and stuff like that is going to become really in the forefront of the design and stuff like that. The Apple CarPlay and the Android Auto have kind of had their day, but at Renault we use Google. Yeah, it's a Google-based system. So if you use Google Maps or those things, you're already doing it. And again, like we said before, this comes down to the teacher and the student with the customers of going through it and making sure that that they fully understand what they need to do and everything else, and the voice controls, and don't forget the park assist, and things like that. I was selling park assist on VW Passats back in the day, 15, 20 years ago. And I used to show customers this feature. I say, watch this, and we do the park, and they go, I'll have it. And you go, well, what about the rest? Oh, no, if it's got this, brilliant. You speak to them a year later, how are you getting all the park assist? Oh, I never use it.
Yeah.
So, okay, that's fine. It's a novelty, isn't it, for them? Some of the first hybrids in the country was the Honda Jazz. And if anybody ever remembers the lime green hybrid Jazzes that used to sort of potter around, they were the first sort of hybrids from that perspective. And you tell people, oh, yeah, I'd use that, or I'd use X, Y, and Z, and you speak to me, they don't use it. So there's some great tools on there for people to use, but are people going to use the voice control? Not many. I don't think there's going to be many people that can use it, but I could be wrong.
So it depends. I mean, so I use Apple CarPlay, and I will ask Siri to do stuff like ring people or send a WhatsApp message to somebody. In fact, there was somebody last year that didn't know that that you could do that once you've got Apple CarPlay working, that it will send messages like that. My God, it made it, she was so excited. But these things make a difference to people. The fact that you don't have to touch anything on the screen, or even, because the one thing I find quite difficult is like haptic buttons on things. Oh, flipping heck. So that's why I do like a bit of a mixture of them. But yeah, it's nice to have that option, to have a bit of both. But I do like using voice commands and stuff like that. And when it says to me, do you want to use ChatGPT for something, I'm like, oh, of course I do, thank you very much. And
I'm sure, look, and again, this is just personal, this is not just but when we were at Mini, obviously the older F-Series Minis used to have the eye control, which is brilliant, the little dial in the middle which you could turn, it done everything on the display. It was fantastic and people loved it. And then all of a sudden that's gone. So certainly with us at Mini, one of the things was actually sort of trying to get people to say, look, you don't need the wheel, everything is on the display. which was a huge display in itself, which had all the information that you want. You just then got, people still want a minute. They've got to go from having that to now using something different, and that's where the voice control side of it would come in. My personal opinion is, as I said, I'm not sure many people will use the voice control, if I'm honest. Some will. I'm not saying that they won't. I don't think there's going to be as many as they think. But again, I can be proved wrong. So
it'll be all the youngsters, love. Come on,
they'll
it'll be
love
all the
all that.
youngsters.
Yeah, and all the techie guys and girls and stuff like that. They'll love all that. But if you're not techie, it is a lot to learn.
Actually, do you know what? I'm just going to step back a second as well, because you mentioned about autonomous vehicles. Where you're not even driving, like you said, iRobot, didn't you? But actually, there is a chap who was one of my very first interviewees on the podcast called Graham Cooper, and he's out in the States. And I can't remember where he was at the time, but I think he was going to a conference, and he's videoing in an autonomous vehicle that was driving him and actually navigating traffic lights. I mean, I'd have just been, oh my God! But it was just amazing. He's kind of going, look, there's nobody in the car. I'm sat in the back and I'm videoing all this stuff.
Well, you've all heard the video. We've all heard the age-old story of the person that bought the RV and was told it had cruise control, and they set the cruise control, got up and went into the back to make a cup of tea and crashed the vehicle.
No, it wasn't that.
That's an old story, but it is that. But it is that sort of thing. I mean, look, when I look at, and I'll take my wife's car as an example. The amount of features on that with the sort of level 1, level 2 autonomous, sort of following traffic and things like that is brilliant. I would use it because I'm like that. I want to use everything that's on the car.
Yeah.
My wife will never use it. Never ever use it. Cruise control never uses. Speed limiter never uses. So as I said, it's going to be down to the individual, and it's going to be down to whether people just want a car that can jump in, charge and drive, or actually they will use and abuse the technology involved. I think they should use and abuse it. I think they should try everything once, within reason, obviously. But you'll never follow the trajectory of the technology that cars are going if you don't sort of try and embrace what it is in front of you.
And I will point out, by the way, it was a taxi he was in. It was an autonomous taxi that he was in, so it wasn't even. It was just, it blew my mind just looking at it. But yes, if you don't know Graham Cooper, check him out on LinkedIn, because that video that he put on there was just, oh my God, it just blew my mind. But look, on the just final question, Simon. You're obviously moving into a slightly different area, but still within automotive. But if you kind of look at what you've been involved in with automotive in general and kind of EVs, etc., what would you really like to see happen over the next kind of 5-10 years?
Cool, dear. I think from a sales point of view, from a showroom perspective, I think is to number one is to not lose the showroom environment. I think it's such an important environment. Unfortunately, we read all these negative stories on LinkedIn as an example of people who've tried to go and buy a car and for whatever reason X, Y, and Z, and it's not been the experience that they want. We have to understand it in the showroom environment, and again, I may get lynched for this, I might not, but it's so imperative, it's so important. If people come in and they've done their research and they know what car to buy, great, still sell them a car. You've still got to put that process into place, because in 3 years time or whatever, they're going to want to come back and hopefully buy from you again. We don't want people to go on and buy from the online places. I still massively believe in the old school of going into a dealership and touching and feeling a car and sitting in it and driving it and wanting to buy it. And I appreciate that that's probably on a downward trajectory for the future. But while it's still here, embrace it. Keep the showrooms alive, keep them buzzing. And I want people to enjoy what they're doing. I want people to genuinely get up in the morning and go, do you know, I still get the buzz of selling a car or speaking to a customer. we all wish we could sell 3-4 cars a day, every day. It'd be great. We'd all be rolling in it. I'd probably still be doing it. But I want people to do that. I think from the industry, I think it's pretty much what everyone wants. I think people just want great cars, great technology. I want, our friends at Westminster to really pull their finger out in terms of the infrastructure side of it. I really do. I think there needs to be more done for that. And I think we need to make it affordable. I think that's where it comes down to, being able to afford to put wall boxes in. If you want people, if you remember back, sorry to go aside, but if you remember back in sort of 2008, 2009, where the government were pushing us to buy diesels, and they gave us, a scrappage scheme, which was brilliant. And if you even talk just 3 years ago, we had all the money that government was throwing at us for buying EV cars. And then all of a sudden it was gone. You can't take that away and expect people to spend more money on buying electric cars because that's what you want them to do. There's got to be some help there, especially, as I said, with so many cars over the £40,000 mark. And this is another conversation completely, but over the £40,000 mark and charging people the same tax bandings as on a petrol car. That has to stop. That is, it's just madness. Why are we even doing that? Why are you sort of giving, sort of robbing Peter to pay Paul kind of thing? It doesn't make any sense. So I think, it's an industry I love, and I hope it carries on going from strength to strength. And I'll always sort of be keeping an eye on what's going on. And fingers crossed, look, it all goes well and we get past, the 2030 and 2035 mandates and things like that. And let's see what happens after that.
We shall, like I said earlier, watch this space. But look, on that note, Simon, it's been really lovely talking to you. I've really enjoyed it, and just, it's been nice to kind of get your thoughts and everything on just automotive in general and dealerships and everything. So I really, really appreciate your time. Thank you ever so much.
Welcome. You're welcome.
And look, for everybody else, please like, subscribe, follow our podcast page on LinkedIn, comment, share with your mates, colleagues, etc. Just let's get this, kind of conversation going. So, but thank you everybody for listening and watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye. Thanks for watching Electric Evolution with Liz Allan. If you've enjoyed this episode, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. If you're a charge point operator, local authority or stakeholder in EV charging, I'd love to talk to you about our Charge Point Evolution framework. It's designed to help you create a seamless EV driver journey, boost utilisation and maximise your return on investment. Alternatively, if you know someone who'd be a great podcast guest or might be interested in sponsoring an episode, you can email me on liz@fullcircleci.co.uk. Thanks again for watching.